So glad you're keeping up with our teaching at Reclamation Welch, where we're committed to living reclaimed lives for the glory of Jesus. Whether you missed our gathering this week and you're catching up, or maybe you're not part of Reclamation Welch and this is supplementing what the Lord is doing in your life, we pray that you're learning to gather regularly with God's people, to grow deeply in your walk with Jesus, and then to go boldly each day, walking in step with the Spirit, to share the light of the gospel in a world in desperate need of hope. For more resources or ways to connect, visit reclamationwelch.com and get in the loop. And if you do not have a church to call home, please reach out or stop by for a Sunday gathering at 10 a.m. in Welch. We're not a perfect church, but we're trusting in the one who is perfect and who's worthy of it all. And don't forget, you are loved.
This morning, we are going to talk about Jesus, our King, who shows up. We are teaching through the Gospel of Mark. We believe in expository preaching of the Word the best we can, book by book, verse by verse, so that we can understand what God has said and why it matters to us. And we are starting in the Gospel of Mark now. And we looked at Jesus' arrival, we looked at his baptism, we looked at his temptation, and now we are looking at the start of Jesus' ministry, where he meets his first disciples, his first crew. And to start off, though, by way of illustration, there's a kerfuffle this week in the news, well, it's really this month, a basketball player who quit the NBA. He's 21 years old. How many hours did he shoot basketball for in his parents' driveway growing up? How many days did he wake up early in high school to do conditioning for practice? He probably went to college and gave everything, moved away from everyone he knew to pursue that dream, and he did it. NBA at 21. Didn't even finish college. But A.J. Griffin of the Heat said he gave up basketball to follow Jesus. And it reminded me of this quote. There's a Reformed scholar, Abraham Kuyper, he said this: when principles that run against your deepest convictions, think of this gentleman leaving basketball, this young man who was awoken by God to say, basketball isn't going to sustain your life, son, but I will. When principles that run against your deepest convictions begin to win the day, then the battle is your calling, and peace has become sin. You must, at the price of dearest peace, lay your convictions bare before friend and enemy with all the fire of your faith. And I think what we see this morning, when we look at verses 16 to 20, we're going to look at how God is in control this morning. We're going to look at how God's in control of life's direction. We're going to see that in a couple verses. We're going to see how God's in control of those messy people. Whoever comes into your mind right now, yes, them too. He's in control of that. There's hope for them. We're also going to look at how he's in control of the details of our life. And we're going to see how he's also in control of the world's massive problems at the same time, the big things in the world. And lastly, even in a hopeless situation, that he's in control of that. So, if you would stand for the reading of the word. Mark 1, 16 to 45. Here we go. One day Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee. He saw Simon, his brother Andrew, throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Jesus called out to them, "Come, follow me. I will show you how to fish for people." And they left their nets at once and followed him. A little further up the shore, Jesus saw Zebedee's sons, James and John, in a boat repairing their nets. He called them at once, and they followed him, leaving their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men. Jesus and his companions, verse 21, went to the town of Capernaum. And when the Sabbath day came, he went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching, for he taught with real authority, quite unlike the teachers of the religious law. Suddenly, a man in the synagogue who was possessed by an evil spirit began shouting, "Why are you interfering with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus cut him short. "Be quiet. Come out of that man," he ordered. And at that, the evil spirit screamed, threw the man into a convulsion, and then came out of him. Amazement gripped the audience, and they began to discuss what had happened. "What sort of new teaching is this?" they asked excitedly. "It has such authority. Even evil spirits obey his orders." The news about Jesus spread quickly throughout the entire region of Galilee. After Jesus left the synagogue with James and John, they went to Simon and Andrew's home. Now Simon's mother-in-law was sick in bed with high fever. They told Jesus about her right away. So he went to her bedside, took her by the hand, helped her sit up, and then the fever left her, and she prepared a meal for them. That evening after sunset, many sick and demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. The whole town gathered at the door to watch. So Jesus healed many people who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons. But because the demons knew who he was, he did not allow them to speak. Before daybreak, verse 35, the next morning, Jesus got up and went to an isolated place to pray. Later, Simon and the others went out to find him. When they found him, they said, "Everyone is looking for you." But Jesus replied, "We must go on to the other towns as well, and I will preach to them too. That is why I came." So he traveled throughout the region of Galilee, preaching in the synagogues and casting out demons. And a man with leprosy came and knelt in front of Jesus, begging to be healed. "If you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean," he said. Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out and touched him. "I am willing," he said. "Be healed." Instantly the leprosy disappeared. The man was healed. Then Jesus sent him on his way with a stern warning. "Don't tell anyone about this. Instead, go to the priest. Let him examine you. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses for those who have been healed of leprosy. This will be a public testimony that you've been cleansed." But the man went and spread the word, proclaiming to everyone what had happened. As a result, large crowds soon surrounded Jesus. He couldn't publicly enter town anywhere. He had to stay out in secluded places. But people from everywhere kept coming to him. Jesus, with Bibles open, what we have not, give us. What we know not, teach us. What we are not, make us. For your glory. Amen? Amen. Please be seated. I hope that's your heart's posture this morning. What you don't have, what you don't know, what you're not yet, that God can do that for you through his word. And so we're going to start in verse 16 to 20. That Jesus is in charge of your life's direction. Look at it with me. Verse 16, one day Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee at the time was a massive industry for fishing. These men were not out on the Tug River. They were not at Wilmore Dam standing on that waterfall where everyone takes pictures of their ATVs trying to catch a bucket to feed their family. These men were likely part of a multi-generational business. Do you feel the pressure on their shoulders already? They are feeding not just their family, but maybe even other families. And actually the fish in the Sea of Galilee were so abundant and so diverse at the time that they would be exporting them elsewhere. So this is a regional influence that the fishermen, hundreds of fishing companies likely on the Sea of Galilee at the time, and they were part of that industry. The Sea of Galilee is 13 miles north to south, 8 miles left to right, so it's going to look more like an ocean. It's like a great lake. Verse 16 says, on the shore of that sea, they're probably sweaty and stinky and smelled like fish, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. And Jesus called out to them, "Come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." So they fish for a living. They have these big, massive, round nets probably. They're tossing them, and they're casting a net over all these fish, and they might have a center rope that they pull up, and they're going to gather these fish in. And Jesus is looking at what they're doing, and he's saying, you know how to succeed in life. I'm going to show you how to succeed with the same level of vigor, the same amount of passion, the same weight on your shoulders, but it's not going to be for fish anymore. It's going to be for souls. And I thought some analogous ways to say that might be, if you're in the football locker room with the guys, Randall, you might say, guys, I'm not going to teach you how to win the battle of the views. I'm going to show you how to win the trophy for souls. You see how that would hit on a football player's shoulders? Or maybe a video game player. Maybe you're reaching out to somebody who loves to play video games. You're saying, I'll show you how to unlock the real cheat code for eternity. I don't know. It's not about the fishing. It's about we know that we live for passion about things. And Jesus is going to be in charge of that same passion of our hearts, and he's going to direct it not just for our enjoyment like we enjoy our things, but he's saying, I'm going to direct that passion you have, that excellence you have for the world. Now, go to the next verse. Verse 18. They left their nets and followed him. A little further up the shore, though, Jesus saw Zebedee's sons. That's an interesting name. James and John in a boat repairing their nets. So here's another family operation. He called them at once, and they also followed him, leaving their father, Zebedee, in the boat with the hired men. What we see here, there's a lot to say. There's interaction with these gentlemen, likely with John the Baptist. Remember we talked about John the Baptist a few weekends ago. If you go to the Gospel of John, you'll see that likely in the timeline of this, that these were guys that baptized, or that John the Baptist baptized with his baptism. But then now Jesus is finding them. Just like Randall's going to go to the high school, or any other person on mission. You might be at work and you go to somebody else's cubicle because you know they need hope. And here's Jesus showing up where they're at, bringing them hope and direction for their life. And what he is gathering is a group of followers, a group of disciples. He is in control of the direction of their life. And we will see that as we continue on now, because there's a lot to say about these verses. But the Gospel of Mark is the shortest gospel. It's a quick gospel. He uses the word immediately. He wants it to flow. So watch the flow. So now he's got this crew of guys. Do they know what they're doing? Think about them talking about shared faith. A lot of times we feel like we don't know what they're doing. These guys who are out there casting nets and Jesus goes, we're going to go fish for souls. They're like, okay, whatever that means. But there was something about Jesus that kept them along. I love the way the next verse starts. Look at verse 21. Jesus in charge now of messy people. Not just the direction of their life, but messy people. Jesus in his what? Someone say that word. We're reading out of the NLT. What's he got now? Companions. Well, anyone else reading out of the ESV or something else? What's another word? What do we got? Jesus and his companions? Companions. He's got a group. There's a fellowship happening. They went now to the town of Capernaum. When the Sabbath day came, he went to the synagogue and began to teach. And the people were amazed at his teaching because he taught with real authority. Now, there's something interesting about the teaching. In the Jewish tradition of the time, there was a temple and there was a synagogue. There wasn't always a synagogue. But after the Babylonian exile, whenever there was no access to the temple, they couldn't perform the temple duties, they came together, God's people did, to discuss the teachings that God had given them. So they couldn't perform all the ceremonial law that they would like to, but they would say, here's what is said about that. What did Moses say about that? And so now, Jesus is in one of those synagogues. This became formalized into the Jewish custom that there would be a discussion place among them, similar to what we're doing. And that idea of that word synagogue is not far off from what we call the ecclesia, or the church, or the gathered people of God. This was God's people gathering. So here Jesus is, a teacher in the synagogue, now likely around 30 years old, give or take. There was different people in that synagogue. There was a minister that kept the scrolls, took care of the facility, pushed a broom maybe. There was a ruler of the synagogue. We meet a ruler later of the synagogue. His name's Jairus. He's in a pickle, and Jesus helps him. He plans the community service. There was an attendant for that same synagogue that read the scripture. There's an interpreter, because there's interpretation that needed to be done into Aramaic. So Jesus here was maybe an attendant. And what are they amazed about? What sets him apart? Look at verse 22. Jesus began to teach, and the people were amazed at his teaching because he taught with what? Authority. Quite unlike the teachers of religious law. You see, Jesus, the Word become flesh, could teach with authority that nobody else could. If you've ever wrote a paper in high school, you had to cite your sources. You have to, because your teacher knows that's not your information. You had to get it somewhere else. But when Jesus showed up, and you'll see it in other places in his teaching, he'll say, truly, truly, or you have heard it said, but I say. And he is teaching with authority here. And they recognize that there's a difference in Jesus' teaching compared to the teaching they were getting. Suddenly, verse 23, though, here's the mess. Great teaching, right? What if someone comes and interrupts church now? Oh, what a mess. A man in the synagogue was possessed by an evil spirit, began shouting, "Why are you interfering with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Now, evil spirits can be a hot topic in our day and age. Demon possession, can a Christian be possessed? We're not going to get into those weeds. Kind of like Randall. You want to talk about it? Talk to me later, and then I might even talk to you a couple days later about it. There's a lot to be said. But one thing is true. The number of occurrences of possessions publicly, evil spirits, spiritual influence, peaks at Jesus' ministry. Just like Jesus was tempted by the tempter just a few verses back, it's something very unique. This is another unique in salvific history that there is a battle going on, and there's a demon-possessed man. And where does he go? Right to interrupt Jesus in his teaching. Why are you interfering with us, verse 24, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? What's the answer to that, friends? Did he come to destroy the evil? Yes. Yes, he did. They knew. Before anyone else was realizing his identity, the darkest spots knew that he was here. And there might be a spot in your life. There might be a spot in you that is flat out wrong and evil and is not from God. And you're going to have to be able to recognize that that is not from God. When evil approached Jesus, it knew immediately, you're here to get rid of me, aren't you? And the answer is yes. Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. But how cool. Jesus cut him off. He cut him short. Be quiet. Come out of the man. Does he destroy the man? If you're the man and you're possessed by a demon, and they take you to the demon slayer, or you're like, what's going to happen to me? The man survives. You see how that could be nerve-wracking? If God wants to deal with the evil in you, can he keep you whole? Anyone else experience that where he's taken evil from you but kept you whole? Left you better than you were, made you more right than you thought you could be. Jesus cut him short. And at that, verse 26, the evil spirit screamed, threw the man into convulsion, and then came out of him in amazement. The root of that word amazement is almost like a terrifying amazement. With eyes wide open, it gripped the audience, and they began to discuss what had happened. What sort of new teaching is this, they asked excitedly. With such authority, even evil spirits obey his orders. And the news about Jesus spread quickly throughout the entire region of Galilee. And that's what happens when lives change, doesn't it? That he deals and sets your life in a direction, and then he deals with messy people, or maybe even messy you, and the word spreads that Hannah's not the same girl she used to be. I pick on Hannah all the time. I don't know why. It just happens. Because when lives change, who notices? Who? People around you. Everywhere. People notice everywhere. All right. So now, look at your next section. Not just in charge of the messy people, though, but look at the details here. We're trying to read this. Imagine you're receiving this. This is testimony from Peter written down by Mark, and you're reading it and being read aloud. I'm trying to clip through it. So now you know, okay, Jesus is in control of my life's direction. He's in control of the mess, an evil spirit even. Something in you that you don't think's fixable. Yes, he's in control of that too. But now, after Jesus left the synagogue, okay, so he's not just a church guy. He's not just teaching in church, healing in church. He left the synagogue, verse 29, with James and John. So now he has his companions. He's going out of the synagogue. They went to Simon and Andrew's home. Imagine that. You go back to home. Now, they lived in multi-generational families. Ever bring someone home, a friend? Oh, who's home? Timmy, who'd you bring to dinner tonight? Jesus. Like, well, that's nice. Just trying to imagine what it would be like. They didn't quite know who he was. He probably commanded some authority. He tended to tell people that they needed to give up their life, and they just said, okay. But an interesting dinner guest at best. But mom's not doing great. Look at verse 30. Simon Peter, his mother-in-law was sick in bed with high fever. They had needs too. There was details about his life. In the middle of him being out there fishing, his family's falling apart. His family's a mess. They told Jesus about her right away. I think that's a good solution. Can you pull an application from that? Right away. Jesus, help. So he went, verse 31, to her bedside. He took her by the hands. Isn't that beautiful? He doesn't always touch people when he heals them. Sometimes they touch him. Sometimes they touch the hem of his garment. Sometimes he heals them from afar. But this time, he went to her bedside and he took her hands. And he just helped her sit up. Do you ever have somebody who just did things easier than you and you kind of hated them for it? She'd probably been suffering for a long time with high fever and they didn't know what to do. And Jesus shows up and goes, here you go. Sometimes life with Jesus is that simple. Maybe you met Christ and he took your mess of a situation, a dire situation, and said, here you go. And he flipped it on its head. The fever left her, and she prepared a meal for them. Now, commentators don't talk about that meal much. I just find it interesting that her first move was, these boys are probably hungry. But now that we have 4 kids, I get it. It's like, if Faith was deadly sick, and Jesus heals her, and she comes back up from downstairs in the basement where she was resting, and she'd be like, are the kids fed? Maybe not a lot about human nature changes sometimes. She prepared a meal. That evening after sunset, many sick and demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. And so here we go. Everything's good until it's not again. Everything's good, but now he's in charge of life's massive problems again. Not just a family detail, a sick mom. But now, the sharks are circling. Now, first they were amazed at his teaching in the synagogue. But now he starts to do what? He's starting to heal people. And everybody loves a good healing story, don't they? And Jesus talks very much about, if you're going to come to me for the healing, you've missed it. The healing is a sign of my identity. My purpose was not in the healing of the physical maladies of our world. My purpose is to show that I have authority on earth to forgive sin. So I say to you, get up and walk. We're going to go there next week in Mark 2 to the paralyzed man. He's in charge of life's massive problems, though. Ever do something good for somebody, and then you get 4 more text messages? We're like, it just happens. You're like, he's just helping out a mom, but next thing you know, that evening after sunset, now it's dark, verse 32. Many sick and demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. He can handle it. The whole town gathered at the door to watch. Now, if every word of the Bible is true, then nobody in that town was not there. The whole town was there. That's not true. The words of the Bible are true, but what that means is it was a massive hubbub in the community. It's like, ever go to the Welch Fall Festival last weekend? Who was there? Your answer is everyone. Everyone was there. So no one was home? Well, no, some people were home, but everyone was there. Everyone was there. The whole town gathered at the door to watch. It was a festival at their house. So Jesus healed many people who were sick with various diseases. He cast out many demons. He was proving his power. But because the demons knew who he was, he didn't allow them to speak. And that's where we're going to go, by the way, in the weeks to come. That there's something in the Christian tradition called the Messianic secret. That there's a secrecy to his identity, that he is going to let it come out at the right time, that he is there to show the people who he is. And we would do well to notice that he wants to be celebrated for his identity as Messiah, but not as a Six Flags for God where you come here under a miracle tent in that nature and he's just out there spitting miracles like a cosmic ATM. Amen? He's not going to be treated that way. And they found, sorry, I lost my spot. But because the demons knew who he was, he didn't allow them to speak. Before daybreak, look at verse 35. The next morning, Jesus got up and went to an isolated place to pray. Do you see that moment of humanity from Jesus there? He went from being baptized, being tempted for 40 days while fasting, to calling these disciples on the lake, walking this large lake with them, to meeting a man who was possessed by an evil spirit in the synagogue, to healing mom who was sick at home, to now there's just throngs of people and he needs a break. Anyone else feel like you need a break? Jesus needed a break too. So what's he do? Jesus, what do you do when you need a break? Verse 35. Before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went to an isolated place to pray. You got to go hide. Parents, anyone else have to hide from your kids? Some people hide, I've heard, in an inflatable hot tub on the back porch after their kids go to bed. That's where I hide. You got to get away. Verse 36, later Simon and the others went out to find him. He didn't get many breaks, did he? When they found him, they said, here it is again, who's looking for you, Jesus? Everyone's looking for you. But Jesus replied, you see the mission here? We must go on to the other towns as well. I'll preach to them too. That is why I came. Jesus is in control of life's massive problems. What they thought was their massive problem, did Jesus agree? It's not their massive problem. First off, I need to teach them, not heal them right now. And secondly, I don't need to stay here. I need to go there. This is going to be a movement. The arrival of King Jesus, the King who shows up, will be an announcement proclaimed in this region. So, verse 39, he traveled throughout the region of Galilee, preaching in the synagogue. So more synagogues, as this synagogue attendant even, maybe, and casting out demons. Now, maybe you're in the midst of massive problems in your life. These crowds did have massive problems. And Jesus did heal them, did he not? And there's a tension. And if you're anything like me, you get a cognitive dissonance about why life can be so hard. You have there's a tension in your brain and in your life about, yeah, but this hurts, God. This hurts. That's really hard. That's really, really hard. PW, who's coming at Christmas, I urge you, show up and bring a friend. His daughter has been through many hard things. His life has been through hard things. But he would be the first to tell you that there is joy in mourning, that there is joy for those who weep. That Jesus said, blessed be whenever you are persecuted for my name's sake. That whether you're out doing good and life is hard, or whether you're at home and life is hard and there are massive problems, that Jesus goes, you are blessed when you mourn. I am with you. And here we are, the last section, verses 40 to 45. He's at these new synagogues, casting out demons around the region of Galilee. And now verse 40. A man with leprosy came. Now, what you should know about leprosy is that it was a death sentence. There was many leprosies at the time, skin rashes, things like that. Those were all leprosies, but there's only one leprosy. And it would start with a sore on your arm, on your foot, somewhere. And if, after a week, you went to go see the teachers of religious law, they would see the color of it. They would see, had it gotten any better? Almost like a doctor would. You'd come get a checkup. Come back in a week. Tell me how it looks. And there were rules. So come see me, and then you're going to be cast out. You're going to come back. And if it's still there, we're going to call it the leprosy. And then you're never going to see your family again. If it's the one, if it's the contagious leprosy, it's going to kill you. And it's going to kill everything around you, everyone you love. If it comes in contact with you, this will kill. That sore is going to turn into a much larger injury that's going to leave your arm a stump. If it's on your nose, you're going to lose your nose. So this man, we don't know what he looks like. Whatever he looks like is not what he originally looked like. Even the guy in the mirror, he doesn't understand anymore. Do you sense the loneliness? If he was married before he contracted this disease, he had not felt the hug of his wife, had not been in 50 feet of her likely because of the law. Since he contracted this, not a hug, not a high five, he would have to cover the bottom of his mouth and tuck his bottom lip over his teeth even likely, and like a town shouter scream from across the road 50 feet away, unclean, unclean, dressed in rags, not allowed to dress like the rest, but dressed in humble attire. Stay away from me. I have leprosy. You think he's desperate? Look where he's at. A man with leprosy came, and now where's he at, though? In front of Jesus. So he's desperate because he broke the law, didn't he? He heard that there's one who can heal. And so this could be a make or break moment for him. This is a make or break moment. If you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean, he said to Jesus. In verse 41, Jesus was moved with what? Compassion. He reached out, and here's the interesting spot. And here's where I think it comes home for us. This man was in a hopeless situation. He's willing to heal him, but what does he do before he heals him? Look at your verses. What does he do? Before Jesus heals him, what's he do? He has compassion, and then what? He touched him. Dirty as he was, hopeless as he was, he touched him. And maybe you're hopeless. Or maybe you're like, I can't get near him. I'm done. And the leper got close to Jesus, but Jesus got closer, and he touched him. Instantly, leprosy disappeared. The man was healed. Jesus sent him on his way with a stern warning. Goes back to that messianic secret. Not yet, friend. Not yet, son. Don't tell anyone about this. Instead, go to the priest and let him examine you. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses for those who have been healed of leprosy. This will be a public testimony that you've been cleansed. He sends this man out now. This is where we're going to go next week, because Mark is setting up for us now at the end of chapter 1, where we're starting in chapter 2 next time, which is a clash between the Pharisees and Jesus himself. The teachers of the religious law who were trying to, through their obedience, curry favor with God. Jesus met these teachers and said, have you never read? Don't you get it? You've made a living, you've made an economy out of this, you have everybody under this. But when the word of flesh dwells among you, You don't recognize him. You don't listen to him. You don't see my authority. So he heals this guy, and he touches him, which would be a death sentence for Jesus. We know in 1 Corinthians 5:21, he who knew no sin became sin for us. He who knew no sin, and the hopeless leper, he touched it. He became sin for us so that through him we might become the righteousness of God. We're going to see that again next week in this paralyzed man. Now, of course, not all new people who love Jesus obey. So look at verse 45. You figure the guy that cleanses you, it's like, just do me a favor. Everyone do you a favor, and they're like, just do me a favor now. Could you keep it quiet? Not this guy. The man went and spread the word, proclaiming to everyone what had happened. Jesus was tired. Remember, he just got finished taking a morning prayer time with God. Here we go. As a result, large crowds soon surrounded Jesus. He couldn't publicly enter a town anywhere. He had to stay out in secluded places. People from everywhere kept coming to him. How crazy is that for the start of the gospel? God shows up to take care of us when we're in our own mess. In the middle of it, he gets in his own messes, right? But he's got these companions, and next week we'll see. Actually, let me tell you, I forgot to mention, next week, Reclamation Monroeville will be here with us. It's my good friend Blake, who was part of the core team of Reclamation Monroeville 10 plus years ago, love, right? Who was planting Reclamation Squirrel Hill in a Jewish community in Pittsburgh, one of the hardest to reach, hardest to live, most expensive places. They are giving up everything, him and his wife and their child, to move to Squirrel Hill because they want to reach the Jewish community there for Christ too. But he'll be preaching next week, and they'll be leading worship, which will be a blessing. But the week after that, we'll go to Mark 2 and look at Jesus' concern for us in our worst. But I do invite the worship team up. We're going to sing as we leave. And I invite you, if you've forgotten how sweet it is that Jesus has loved you like that, take time, sing, pray, whatever you got to do. But let's do this together as an act of worship this morning.